We live in the most connected age in human history, yet we feel more alone than ever. We have access to infinite information, yet we feel lost. We have more comfort than kings of the past, yet we feel more empty. Ibn Arabi would say, this isn't a coincidence. It's the symptom of forgetting who you really are. 800 years ago, Ibn Arabi walked through the markets of Cordoba, watching people go about their daily lives. Even then, he noticed something peculiar. The people who seemed to have everything they needed often carried a sadness in their eyes. The merchants with full stores felt hollow. The scholars with vast knowledge felt ignorant. The wealthy felt poor in ways they couldn't name. Ibn Arabi began to understand that there are two kinds of poverty: the poverty of lacking what you need, and the poverty of having everything you think you need, but still feeling empty inside. The second kind, he realized, was far more dangerous because it was invisible today. We call this second kind of poverty depression, anxiety, or mental illness. We treat it with medications and therapy, and sometimes these help. But Ibn Arabi would say we're treating the symptoms while ignoring the root cause. The root cause isn't chemical. It isn't psychological. It's spiritual, but not in the way most people think. When Ibn Arabi used the word spiritual, he didn't mean religious. He meant the part of you that seeks meaning, connection, and purpose. The part that knows there's more to existence than just surviving, consuming, and dying. The part that feels restless when life becomes too small, too predictable, too disconnected from anything larger than yourself. Modern life, with all its conveniences and distractions, has created a perfect storm for this kind of spiritual starvation. We've gained incredible technological power, but we've lost something essential in the process. Ibn Arabi would call it the sense of the sacred in everyday life. Not think about it. Our ancestors lived in direct relationship with the natural world. They watched the sun rise and set every day. They felt the seasons change in their bodies. They knew where their food came from because they grew it themselves. They lived in small communities where every person mattered, where their actions had visible consequences, where their stories were woven into a larger narrative of family and tradition. Most importantly, they lived with mystery. They didn't have Google to answer every question instantly. They had to sit with not knowing, and in that space of not knowing, something else could emerge. Wonder, awe, a sense that life was bigger than their individual understanding. Now, look at modern life. You wake up in an artificial box, surrounded by artificial light, eating artificial food. You spend your day staring at screens, processing abstract information that has no direct connection to your physical reality. You interact with hundreds of people through digital interfaces, but these interactions are shallow, temporary, forgettable. You have access to more information than any human in history, but somehow you know less about yourself than a medieval peasant knew about themselves. You can communicate instantly with people on the other side of the world, but you can't have a real conversation with the person sitting next to you. You have more entertainment options than royalty once enjoyed, but you're bored most of the time. Ibn Arabi would say this is because you've been feeding your mind endless stimulation while starving your soul of what it actually needs. And what does the soul need? It needs connection. Not the shallow connection of social media likes in text messages, but deep connection. Connection to something larger than your individual ego and its endless wants and fears. This is where Ibn Arabi's insight becomes revolutionary. He realized that the feeling we call depression or emptiness isn't actually a sickness. It's your soul's natural response to being disconnected from what matters most. It's like your body getting hungry when you haven't eaten. The hunger isn't the problem. The lack of real food is the problem. Your soul is hungry, and you've been trying to feed it junk food. Digital stimulation instead of real experience. Shallow relationships instead of deep connection. Information instead of wisdom. distraction instead of presence, consumption instead of creation, taking instead of giving. Ibn Arabi discovered that the cure for this spiritual starvation isn't more therapy or medication, though these can help with the symptoms. The cure is reconnection. But reconnection to what, exactly? This is where his wisdom becomes practical and life-changing. First, reconnection to your own inner life. In our externally focused world, we have lost touch with our internal landscape. We know more about celebrities' private lives than we know about our own deepest thoughts and feelings. We spend more time consuming other people's ideas than developing our own. We're more familiar with fictional characters than we are with our authentic selves. Ibn Arabi taught a practice he called the inner witness. Several times a day, stop whatever you're doing and ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? What am I thinking? What do I actually need in this moment? Not what you think you should be feeling or thinking, but what's actually there. That most people discover they've been running from their inner life for so long that they don't even know what's there anymore. They've become strangers to themselves. But Ibn Arabi promised that if you persist in this practice of inner attention, you'll begin to discover a richness and depth inside yourself that no external entertainment can match. Second, reconnection to direct experience. We live most of our lives through abstractions. We experience nature through documentaries instead of walking outside. We learn about other cultures through social media instead of actually meeting people different from ourselves. We consume art instead of creating it. We read about adventures instead of having them. Ibn Arabi would say that every abstraction, no matter how well crafted, is a step away from reality. And reality is where life actually happens. The cure for emptiness is to spend more time in direct contact with the real world. Touch things. Smell things. Listen to sounds that aren't coming through speakers. Have conversations with people who are actually in the same room as you. This might sound simple, but it's revolutionary in our current culture. When was the last time you spent an hour without any digital input? When did you last have a meal without looking at a screen? When did you last sit in silence long enough to actually hear your own thoughts? Third, reconnection to something larger than yourself. This is where Ibn Arabi's insight becomes most profound. He realized that human beings are not designed to live for themselves alone. We're designed to be part of something bigger. When we lose that sense of participation in a larger story, we feel empty no matter what else we have. This doesn't have to mean religion, though for some people it does. It could mean committing to a cause you believe in. It could mean taking responsibility for the well-being of your community. It could mean creating something that will outlast your lifetime. It could mean dedicating yourself to learning and growth in a way that serves others. The key insight is that meaning doesn't come from getting what you want. It comes from giving what you have. Depression often lifts not when people get more for themselves, but when they find ways to contribute to something beyond themselves. Ibn Arabi told the story of a wealthy merchant who had everything he thought he wanted, but felt completely empty inside. Nothing brought him joy. Food had no taste. Success had no satisfaction. Even his family relationships felt hollow. He consulted doctors, philosophers, and spiritual teachers, but nothing helped. Finally, an old woman in the marketplace told him something that changed his life. She said, "You feel empty because you live only for yourself. A cup that only pours in and never pours out eventually becomes stagnant and bare. You need to find a way to give what you have received." The merchant began using his wealth not just for his own comfort, but to help struggling families in his community. He used his business skills not just to make money, but to create opportunities for young people who had none. For the first time in years, he felt alive, connected, purposeful. Ibn Arabi would say this merchant discovered the secret of spiritual fulfillment. You can't fill an empty soul by taking more in. You fill it by letting what you have flow out in service of something larger than your individual desires and fears. Fourth, reconnection to presence. Most of our mental suffering comes from living everywhere except where we actually are. We're anxious about futures that may never happen. We're depressed about pasts that we can't change. We're dissatisfied with presents that we're not fully experiencing because we're too busy thinking about somewhere else. Ibn Arabi practiced something he called the eternal now. He would regularly interrupt whatever he was doing and remind himself, this moment is the only moment that actually exists. Everything else is memory or imagination. Where am I right now? What is actually happening right now? This practice sounds simple, but it's profoundly healing. When you're fully present, most of your psychological suffering disappears. Anxiety is always about the future. Depression is often about the past. But reality exists only in the present moment, and reality, Ibn Arabi discovered, is always workable, always manageable, always containing exactly what you need. The cure for modern emptiness isn't found in more stimulation, more achievement, more consumption, or more distraction. It's found in returning to basics that humans have always needed, but that our current culture has forgotten how to provide. Connection to your inner life. Connection to direct experience. Connection to something larger than yourself. Connection to the present moment. These aren't luxury items for people who have solved all their practical problems. They're basic nutritional requirements for a healthy human soul. Ibn Arabi spent years studying people who had found genuine fulfillment and happiness, and he discovered that they all had one thing in common. They had learned how to be fully where they were, doing what they were doing, with attention and care. They weren't constantly looking for the next thing, the better thing, the thing that would finally make them happy. They had discovered that happiness isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a way of traveling. It's not something you find outside yourself. It's something you bring to whatever situation you're in. This is perhaps Ibn Arabi's most revolutionary insight about modern emptiness. We think the problem is that our lives lack something essential, and we need to add more: the right relationship, the right career, the right amount of money, the right living situation. But Ibn Arabi would say the problem isn't what's missing from your external life. The problem is what's missing from your relationship to your life. You could have the exact same external circumstances and feel completely different about them simply by changing how you relate to them. By being present instead of absent. By being grateful instead of entitled. By being curious instead of judgmental. By being connected instead of isolated. The cure for feeling disconnected isn't finding the perfect external connections. It's learning how to connect fully to whatever and whoever is already in your life. This includes connecting fully to yourself, to your work, to your family, to your community, to the natural world around you. Ibn Arabi would say that depression and emptiness are not signs that something is wrong with you. They're signs that something is right with you. They're your soul's way of refusing to accept a life that's too small, too shallow, too disconnected from what matters most. Your emptiness isn't your enemy. It's your inner wisdom trying to guide you toward a more authentic, connected, meaningful way of living. Instead of trying to medicate it away or distract yourself from it, Ibn Arabi would suggest listening to what it's trying to tell you. What is your emptiness asking for? Not more stimulation, not more achievements, not more possessions. It's asking for more reality, more presence, more connection, more meaning, more participation in the larger story of existence. And here's the beautiful thing Ibn Arabi discovered. When you begin to respond to this calling, when you start reconnecting to what your soul actually needs, you don't just feel better. You become a source of healing and connection for others. Your presence becomes a gift. Your attention becomes medicine. Your authenticity becomes an invitation for others to be authentic. The cure for modern emptiness spreads through connection. When one person remembers how to be fully present, others remember too. When one person chooses depth over distraction, others are inspired to do the same. When one person commits to something larger than their individual wants and fears, they create space for others to do likewise. Ibn Arabi believed that the emptiness so many people feel today isn't a personal problem requiring individual solutions. It's a collective forgetting that requires collective remembering. We've forgotten how to live as connected human beings in a connected world. But we can remember. And it starts with each person taking responsibility for their own reconnection. You're not depressed. You're not broken. You're not mentally ill. You're disconnected from what your soul needs to thrive. And unlike depression, disconnection has a clear, practical cure. It just requires the courage to turn away from the distractions and turn toward what's real. If this video resonated with you, like this video and share this with your loved ones. Thanks for watching.